November 14th, 1965, 10:48 hours, Ia Drang Valley, Central Highlands, South Vietnam. Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen watched from concealed observation post as 16 UH-1 Huey helicopters descended into clearing designated landing zone X-ray, approximately 800 meters from his position. The helicopters, approaching in formation at 100 knots, then flaring nose up to arrest forward momentum before settling onto elephant grass, delivered approximately 80 American soldiers from 1st Cavalry Division, airmobile, who immediately established defensive perimeter while helicopters departed for additional lifts. And had never witnessed this tactical employment before, American forces bypassing ground routes using helicopters to deploy directly into areas requiring days of foot march, eliminating traditional warning time that ground movement provided and creating instant combat presence in locations previously requiring deliberate infiltration, and had problem that was tactically revolutionary and strategically terrifying. His regiment, 66th Regiment, People's Army of Vietnam, occupied positions surrounding clearing that Americans were using as landing zone. Traditional military doctrine suggested he should attack landing zone while Americans were vulnerable during deployment before they could consolidate forces. But helicopter speed meant that reinforcements would arrive within minutes of initial contact, allowing Americans to rapidly mass forces overwhelming any attack and launched. Additionally, attacking would reveal his positions, inviting devastating American airstrikes and artillery that helicopters could coordinate within minutes. Conversely, allowing continued landings meant Americans would establish strong position, potentially threatening his regiment's positions. The mathematics said, impossible tactical situation. If an attacked immediately, initial assault might succeed against 80 soldiers, but follow-on helicopter lifts would deliver reinforcements faster than his forces could exploit success. American doctrine called for deploying entire battalion of approximately 450 soldiers within 30 minutes, meaning that within half hour, his forces would face consolidated American position supported by helicopter gunships and artillery. If he didn't attack, Americans would complete deployment, establishing battalion strength force in his operational area that could hunt his regiment or block withdrawal routes. Traditional infantry tactics assumed that attacking enemy during vulnerable deployment phase was optimal, but helicopter mobility eliminated vulnerability phase by allowing instantaneous reinforcement, and made decision in approximately 3 minutes that would influence how North Vietnamese forces engaged American helicopter operations throughout war. He would not attack landing zone immediately, but would establish ambush positions along routes Americans would likely patrol, allowing his forces to engage on favorable terms after Americans left landing zone. This decision meant accepting American deployment rather than contesting it, but avoided exposing his forces to devastating counterattack that helicopter mobility enabled. Additionally, allowing Americans to deploy then ambushing patrols might draw them into sustained engagement, where his numerical superiority, regiment versus battalion, could compensate for American firepower advantages. Think about that calculation. November 1965. North Vietnamese commander, whose military experience was based on fighting French forces using ground mobility, now facing enemy who could deploy entire battalions by air within minutes, bypassing traditional approaches and creating instant combat presence anywhere helicopters could land. This represented paradigm shift in warfare, where mobility through air eliminated terrain advantages that Vietnamese forces had relied upon throughout history. Dense jungle that slowed ground movement became irrelevant when enemy flew over it, deploying forces directly into combat zones. What An didn't know as he watched more helicopters arrive delivering additional American troops was that this engagement, Battle of Ia Drang, would become first major battle between American and North Vietnamese forces, establishing patterns that would characterize war. That battle would last 4 days, with approximately 2,000 North Vietnamese soldiers attacking American positions, suffering estimated 1,200–1,800 killed versus approximately 300 Americans killed, demonstrating both American firepower's devastating effectiveness and North Vietnamese willingness to accept catastrophic casualties, achieving tactical objectives. What An didn't know was that helicopter mobility would prove so effective that by 1966, American forces would operate over 2,000 helicopters in Vietnam, making it most helicopter-intensive war in history. That UH-1 Huey alone would see production exceeding 7,000 aircraft, becoming iconic symbol of Vietnam War and fundamentally changing infantry operations by providing tactical mobility that ground forces had never possessed, allowing rapid deployment, reinforcement, and medical evacuation. What An didn't know was that North Vietnamese forces would develop elaborate countermeasures against helicopters, including anti-aircraft weapons, tactics for engaging landing zones, and strategies avoiding engagement when American helicopter mobility provided overwhelming advantage. That these adaptations would reduce but never eliminate helicopter mobility's tactical advantages, demonstrating that even after enemy adapts to new technology, technological superiority provides sustained benefits when properly employed. What An didn't know was that psychological impact of helicopters would prove nearly as significant as tactical impact. That distinctive sound of Huey rotors, whop, 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 audible for kilometers, would become feared signature warning of American presence. That watching helicopters deliver troops and firepower with impunity would create sense of American invincibility that North Vietnamese commanders would need to consciously counter through political education, emphasizing that helicopters, despite impressive capabilities, were vulnerable to coordinated ground fire. What An didn't know was that his own testimony decades after war would acknowledge helicopters' revolutionary impact while noting they didn't prove decisive because North Vietnamese adapted tactics, avoiding situations where helicopter mobility provided Americans decisive advantages. That post-war analysis would conclude helicopters were devastatingly effective tactically, but that strategic objectives required political changes that mobility advantages alone couldn't achieve. What An didn't know was that medical evacuation, medevac, using helicopters, would revolutionize battlefield medicine, creating survival rates unprecedented in military history. That wounded soldiers reaching medical facilities within golden hour through helicopter evacuation would survive injuries that would have been fatal in previous wars. That this capability, while saving American lives, would also reduce pressure for tactical success because casualties could be evacuated quickly, reducing battlefield losses even when engagements produced heavy wounded. What An didn't know was that American dependence on helicopters would create vulnerabilities when helicopters couldn't operate effectively. That monsoon weather, darkness, and heavy vegetation limiting landing zones would create windows where North Vietnamese forces could operate without facing immediate American helicopter response. That understanding these windows would become critical to North Vietnamese tactical planning, allowing operations during periods when American mobility advantages were reduced. What An didn't know was that debate about helicopter effectiveness would continue for decades, with advocates arguing helicopters revolutionized warfare, enabling new operational concepts, while critics, arguing expensive helicopter-centric approach, consumed resources better allocated to other capabilities. That Vietnam would prove simultaneously that helicopters provided unprecedented tactical mobility and that tactical mobility alone couldn't achieve strategic victory when political conditions didn't support military operations. The mathematics of mobility were being written in deployment times and reinforcement rates and casualty evacuation speeds that would prove that technological advantage providing superior mobility can dominate tactical engagements but cannot guarantee strategic victory when opponent adapts tactics avoiding direct engagement, and when political objectives require more than battlefield success. And those mathematics would demonstrate that military innovations creating temporary advantages eventually face countermeasures that, while not eliminating advantages, reduce their decisiveness over time as opponents adapt. By time Americans completed initial deployment at Landing Zone X-Ray, approximately 450 soldiers from 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry deployed within 30 minutes through multiple helicopter lifts, transformation from ground-based infantry operations to airmobile operations capable of deploying battalion-strength forces directly into combat zones within minutes had been demonstrated. And calculation that traditional infantry tactics were inadequate against enemy possessing instantaneous mobility and reinforcement capability had been made by commander watching technological revolution in warfare that his forces would need to adapt to or be destroyed by, in encounters where American mobility advantages made conventional tactics suicidal. 1961 to 1964. 4 years before Ia Drang, American military began deploying helicopters to Vietnam initially for reconnaissance and transportation, gradually expanding to tactical troop deployment, creating capabilities that would fundamentally alter infantry operations. Early helicopter deployments served limited roles. According to records, 1961-1962, approximately 30 helicopters deployed supporting South Vietnamese operations. Roles: reconnaissance observing enemy movements, transportation moving supplies and personnel, medical evacuation, retrieving wounded from battlefield. These initial deployments demonstrated helicopters' utility, but didn't fundamentally change tactical operations. Helicopters supplemented ground operations rather than replacing them. Tactical mobility concept emerged gradually. According to doctrine development, traditional infantry operations require forces to move by foot or vehicle to combat zones, process taking days or weeks depending on terrain and distance. Helicopters enable bypassing ground movement, deploying forces directly into combat areas. This creates new operational possibilities. Rapid deployment, allowing forces to reach areas before enemy can reinforce or escape. Surprise insertion, allowing attacks from unexpected directions. Immediate reinforcement, allowing outnumbered forces to receive support within minutes. These capabilities suggest that helicopter mobility could revolutionize infantry tactics when employed systematically rather than as mere transportation supplement. 11th Air Assault Division experiments tested airmobile concepts. According to test program 1963-1964, Army established experimental division testing airmobile operations. Tests examined optimal helicopter to infantry ratios, tactics for helicopter insertion under fire, coordination between helicopter units and ground forces, logistical requirements supporting sustained helicopter operations. Results demonstrated that properly organized airmobile forces could achieve mobility exceeding traditional infantry by orders of magnitude. Successive tests led to establishment of 1st Cavalry Division, airmobile 1965. First full division organized around helicopter mobility rather than ground vehicles. Vietnamese forces initially encountered helicopters in advisory role. According to North Vietnamese accounts, early encounters with American helicopters occurred when Americans advised South Vietnamese operations. We observed helicopters delivering supplies, evacuating wounded, conducting reconnaissance. These uses were concerning but not revolutionary. Helicopters served support functions, but South Vietnamese forces still conducted ground operations traditionally. Helicopters made operations more efficient, but didn't fundamentally change tactical approaches. 1st Cavalry Division deployment 1965 represented qualitative change. According to deployment description, 1st Cavalry Division deployed to Vietnam September 1965 with approximately 16,000 personnel and 400+ helicopters. This represented 1st Division, where helicopter mobility was primary rather than supplemental capability. Division doctrine emphasized rapid deployment by air to any location helicopters could reach, sustained operations using helicopter resupply, eliminating ground supply lines, quick reaction to enemy contact, allowing battalion-level reinforcement within 30 minutes. This organizational approach represented paradigm shift from viewing helicopters as support assets to viewing them as fundamental enabling technology for new operational concepts. November 14 to 18, 1965. Ia Drang Valley Battle demonstrated both helicopter mobility's revolutionary tactical advantages and its limitations when facing determined opposition willing to accept catastrophic casualties. American deployment into Landing Zone X-ray was classic airmobile operation. According to operational plan, 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry will conduct helicopter assault into Landing Zone X-ray, clearing in Ia Drang Valley near Cambodian border, where intelligence suggests significant enemy presence. Objective: locate and engage enemy forces, preventing their operations against Special Forces camp at Plei Me. Deployment: 16 helicopters flying multiple lifts will deploy entire battalion within 30 minutes, establishing defensive perimeter from which patrols will search for enemy forces. Initial landing encountered immediate opposition. According to after-action report, 1st Helicopter Lift at 10:48 hours deployed approximately 80 soldiers from Company B. Within minutes of landing, forces encountered sniper fire from tree line. 2nd Lift delivered Company A at 1100 hours encountering heavier fire. By 12:30 hours, most of battalion had deployed, but was engaged by substantial enemy forces estimated at regiment strength. Situation developed into sustained close combat with enemy pressing attacks attempting to overrun American positions. North Vietnamese forces attacked in waves. According to engagement description, 66th Regiment Piavan launched multiple assaults against American perimeter, attempting to overwhelm defenders before reinforcements arrived. Attacks came from multiple directions, with forces advancing despite devastating casualties from American rifles, machine guns, and artillery. North Vietnamese tactical approach emphasized massed attacks attempting to achieve local superiority, close combat reducing effectiveness of American artillery and air support, sustained pressure preventing consolidation of defensive positions. Helicopter mobility enabled rapid reinforcement. According to operational report, as engagement intensified, additional companies were deployed by helicopter directly into Landing Zone X-ray under fire. Additionally, artillery batteries were deployed to nearby positions by helicopter, allowing fire support within 30 minutes of initial contact. Medical evacuation helicopters, medevac, continuously evacuated wounded, allowing rapid treatment and preventing casualties from overwhelming defensive capabilities. This rapid reinforcement and support demonstrated helicopter mobility's decisive advantage. What would have required days using ground movement was accomplished within hours. Casualties reflected intensity of close combat. According to battle summary, November 14-17, approximately 2,000 North Vietnamese soldiers engaged American forces at Landing Zone X-ray and subsequent positions. North Vietnamese casualties, estimated 1,200, 1,800 killed, unknown wounded. American casualties, approximately 300 killed, 550 wounded. Casualty ratio, approximately 5.1, favoring Americans. However, raw numbers understate battle's intensity. Hand-to-hand combat occurred with enemy advancing to within meters of American positions. Only American firepower superiority through artillery and air support prevented being overrun despite being outnumbered. Battle's conclusion demonstrated both sides' tactical perspectives. According to assessments, Americans claimed decisive victory, citing favorable casualty ratios and enemy withdrawal from battlefield. North Vietnamese claimed tactical success, citing that they had engaged American forces on favorable terms, inflicting substantial casualties, demonstrating that American technology didn't make them invulnerable. Both assessments contained truth. Americans proved helicopter mobility could deploy and sustain forces deep in enemy territory. But North Vietnamese proved they could engage American forces effectively, accepting heavy casualties, achieving tactical objectives. 1966 to 1968. Following Ia Drang, North Vietnamese forces developed countermeasures against American helicopter operations, demonstrating military adaptation to technological advantages, even when adaptation doesn't eliminate advantages entirely. Anti-aircraft weapons deployment increased dramatically according to intelligence reports. 1966-1967, North Vietnamese significantly expanded anti-aircraft capabilities, deploying 12.7mm and 14.5mm heavy machine guns, 23mm and 37mm anti-aircraft cannons, and man-portable SA-7 surface-to-air missiles. These weapons created dangerous environment for helicopters, particularly during landing and takeoff, when helicopters were slow and predictable. By 1968, most helicopter operations in contested areas encountered ground fire with resulting casualties, making helicopter operations risky despite providing mobility advantages. Tactical adjustments targeted helicopter vulnerabilities. According to captured documents, helicopters are vulnerable during approach to landing zones when following predictable flight paths, landing when stationary on ground, takeoff when slow and climbing. Tactics: pre-position forces near likely landing zones, engaging helicopters during vulnerable phases, use anti-aircraft weapons concentrating fire during approach and landing, attack landing zones while enemy is disembarking before forces can consolidate. These tactics create casualties among helicopter crews and disembarking infantry, reducing effectiveness of helicopter operations. Landing zone preparation became an elaborate process, according to American operational procedures. Prior to troop insertion, landing zones receive artillery preparation, firing approximately 200 rounds, creating smoke and explosions, preventing effective aimed fire. Aerial rocket artillery strikes from helicopter gunships, suppressing ground fire. Reconnaissance by scout helicopters, identifying enemy positions. This preparation reduces but doesn't eliminate risk to troop helicopters. Enemy forces accepting losses during preparation phase can still engage troop helicopters, creating casualties. Dispersal reduced vulnerability to concentrated helicopter assaults. According to North Vietnamese guidance, avoid concentrating forces in areas where American helicopters can deploy overwhelming force within minutes. Instead, disperse into small units, company or platoon size, separated by sufficient distance that American battalion-level deployments cannot engage multiple units simultaneously. Accept reduced command efficiency from dispersal, but gain survivability, reducing likelihood of catastrophic losses when Americans detect concentrations and deploy forces against them. Night operations exploited helicopter limitations. According to Tactical Manual, helicopters operate primarily during daylight when visibility allows safe flight and target identification. Darkness provides protection from helicopter mobility advantages. Move supplies and personnel at night when helicopter interdiction is minimal. Conduct attacks at night when immediate helicopter reinforcement is unlikely. Use darkness for concealment when American observation advantages are reduced. Night operations require different skills but reduce casualties from helicopter-enabled American responses. Sanctuary areas in Cambodia and Laos provided refuge. According to operational planning, American ground forces generally don't operate in Cambodia or Laos due to political restrictions, though helicopters occasionally violate airspace during pursuit operations. Sanctuary areas provide base areas beyond routine American helicopter operations, allowing rest and refit, supply routes with reduced interdiction, training areas where forces can prepare without constant American pressure. Disadvantage: movement to and from sanctuaries involves long distances vulnerable to helicopter interdiction. However, sanctuaries provide essential strategic depth, allowing sustained operations despite American mobility advantages. Medical challenges reflected adaptation limitations. According to North Vietnamese medical reports, American helicopter medevac creates survival advantages we cannot match. Their wounded reach hospitals within golden hour, while our wounded often die from injuries that would be survivable with quick treatment. We cannot duplicate helicopter medevac due to lacking helicopters and to American air superiority, preventing our helicopters from operating safely. This creates morale differential where American soldiers know they'll receive rapid treatment if wounded, while our soldiers know survival depends on severity of wounds and luck in receiving timely ground evacuation. This medical disparity is one of helicopters' most significant advantages that we cannot effectively counter. American helicopter operations in Vietnam represented most intensive rotary wing aircraft usage in military history, creating unprecedented tactical mobility while consuming vast resources and producing heavy casualties among helicopter crews. Deployment scale was extraordinary. According to statistics, peak helicopter inventory, approximately 12,000 helicopters deployed to Southeast Asia during war, including 7,000 plus UH-1 Huey utility transport helicopters, 1,400 plus UH-1 Cobra attack helicopters, 2,700 plus UH-6, UH-58 observation helicopters, plus CH-47 Chinook heavy lift and CH-54 Sky Crane cargo helicopters. This represented unprecedented concentration of rotary wing aircraft, vastly exceeding any previous conflict. By comparison, all other American conflicts combined had used fewer than 1,000 helicopters total. Operational tempo was intense. According to flight hour statistics, average helicopter flew approximately 800 hours annually in Vietnam compared to 200, 300 hours annually in peacetime. This intense usage resulted from constant demand for troop transport supporting airmobile operations, medical evacuation missions operating 24/7, resupply flights delivering ammunition and supplies to remote bases, reconnaissance missions searching for enemy forces. Intense tempo created maintenance challenges requiring extensive maintenance personnel and spare parts support. Casualties among helicopter crews were substantial. According to casualty records, approximately 5,000 helicopters were destroyed in Vietnam through combat and accidents. Helicopter crew casualties, approximately 5,000 killed, 3,000 wounded. Loss rate, approximately 1.7 per 1,000 flight hours during peak combat years. These losses reflected helicopters' vulnerability to ground fire, particularly during landing and takeoff phases. Most dangerous missions, insertion into contested landing zones, medical evacuation under fire, resupply to bases under attack. Crew casualties created morale challenges requiring constant crew rotation and replacement training. Maintenance demands were enormous. According to logistics reports, maintaining helicopter fleet required approximately 30,000 maintenance personnel, continuous supply of spare parts with high consumption rates for rotors, engines, and transmission components, extensive maintenance facilities at bases throughout Vietnam. Each flight hour required approximately 8 to 10 maintenance hours, creating massive logistics footprint. Additionally, tropical environment created corrosion and component degradation, requiring increased maintenance frequency. Maintenance demands meant significant resources were devoted to sustaining helicopter operations rather than to combat capabilities. Tactical innovations emerged from operational experience. According to Doctrine development, Vietnam operations produced tactical innovations including formation flying patterns reducing vulnerability during insertion, helicopter gunship escorts providing suppressive fire during landings, rapid extraction techniques allowing pickup of forces under fire, night vision equipment enabling limited night operations. These innovations improved effectiveness, reducing casualties and expanding operational capabilities. However, fundamental vulnerability to ground fire remained constant throughout war. Helicopters operating in defended airspace faced continuous danger that tactics could mitigate but never eliminate. Psychological impact on both sides was significant. According to assessments, for Americans, helicopters represented technological superiority and provided psychological security, knowing that reinforcement and medical evacuation were rapidly available. For North Vietnamese, helicopter sound became feared signature of American presence, creating anxiety and forcing tactical caution. However, over time, psychological impact diminished as North Vietnamese forces became accustomed to helicopters and developed confidence that prepared positions could survive helicopter assaults through coordinated ground fire and defensive tactics. Comparison between American helicopter-centric operations and North Vietnamese ground-based operations revealed fundamentally different approaches to mobility, where American technological advantage provided tactical benefits without guaranteeing strategic success. American approach emphasized rapid mobility, deploying forces anywhere helicopters could reach. According to Doctrine, helicopter mobility enables rapid deployment, allowing forces to reach combat zones within hours rather than days, surprise allowing attacks from unexpected directions, flexible response allowing quick reinforcement of threatened positions or exploitation of opportunities. This mobility advantage makes terrain largely irrelevant. Dense jungle that would slow ground movement for days can be overflown in minutes, deploying forces directly into combat zones. Strategy: use mobility advantage to find, fix, and destroy enemy forces before they can escape or effectively resist. North Vietnamese approach emphasized dispersal and concealment, avoiding situations where American mobility advantages were decisive. According to strategy, we cannot match American helicopter mobility, making concentrated operations vulnerable to rapid American response, deploying overwhelming force. Instead, emphasize dispersal into small units, reducing targets for American airmobile operations. Concealment using terrain and camouflage, preventing American detection until engagement begins on favorable terms. Operations during darkness or weather, when helicopter mobility is reduced. Sanctuary areas, providing refuge beyond routine American helicopter reach. Accept that we cannot achieve mobility matching Americans, but recognize that strategic objectives don't require mobility parity. Sustaining operations despite American advantages eventually exhausts their commitment. Resource allocation differences were stark. According to comparative analysis, Americans devoted enormous resources to helicopter operations: 12,000 helicopters, 30,000 maintenance personnel, continuous spare parts supply, fuel consumption exceeding millions of gallons monthly. This helicopter-centric approach consumed significant portion of overall military resources. North Vietnamese devoted resources to infantry training and weapons, tunnel and fortification construction, supply infiltration along Ho Chi Minh Trail. Resource allocation reflected different strategic priorities. Americans emphasized technological superiority and mobility, while North Vietnamese emphasized manpower and endurance. Effectiveness metrics depended on perspective. According to analysis, by tactical metrics, helicopters were extraordinarily effective, enabled deployment speed impossible with ground movement, created favorable casualty ratios through firepower concentration and rapid reinforcement, provided medical evacuation, creating unprecedented survival rates. By strategic metrics, helicopters' effectiveness was ambiguous. Tactical mobility advantages didn't prevent enemy from sustaining operations. Resource consumption on helicopter operations reduced resources available for other capabilities. Dependence on helicopters created vulnerability, when weather or enemy tactics prevented effective helicopter employment. Helicopters were tactically revolutionary but strategically insufficient for achieving political objectives that military power alone couldn't accomplish. Post-war assessments reflected continued debate. According to retrospective analyses, helicopter advocates argue Vietnam proved rotary wing mobility's value, revolutionizing infantry operations, and that tactical success demonstrated conceptual validity. Critics argue expensive helicopter-centric approach consumed resources disproportionate to strategic benefits achieved, and that ground-based approaches would have been more cost-effective. Both perspectives contain validity. Helicopters did provide unprecedented mobility, creating tactical advantages. But mobility advantages didn't translate to strategic victory when political conditions didn't support military operations, making resource allocation debate fundamentally about whether tactical superiority justifies resource costs when strategic success isn't achieved. American helicopter operations in Vietnam revealed fundamental truths about technological innovation's tactical impact, about limitations of mobility advantages achieving strategic objectives, about adaptation to new technologies, reducing but not eliminating their advantages, and about resource costs of maintaining technological superiority in sustained conflicts. First truth: technological innovations providing new capabilities create temporary decisive advantages that diminish over time as opponents develop countermeasures. Innovations remain valuable but become less decisive as adaptation occurs. Helicopters initially provided overwhelming tactical advantage through unprecedented mobility, allowing rapid deployment and reinforcement. North Vietnamese forces initially lacked effective countermeasures, making helicopter operations relatively safe. However, North Vietnamese adapted, deploying anti-aircraft weapons, developing tactics for engaging landing zones, adjusting operations, avoiding situations where helicopter mobility provided Americans decisive advantages. These adaptations reduced but didn't eliminate helicopters' effectiveness. Helicopters remained tactically valuable throughout war, but became more dangerous to operate and less decisive as enemy adapted. Modern relevance. Military innovations create windows of opportunity when they're new, but require continuous development, staying ahead of opponents' countermeasures. Technological advantage is dynamic rather than permanent, requiring sustained innovation rather than one-time investment. Second truth: tactical mobility advantages don't guarantee strategic success when opponents' strategy emphasizes endurance rather than decisive engagement, and when political objectives require more than battlefield dominance. Helicopters provided Americans unprecedented ability to deploy forces rapidly, creating favorable tactical conditions in virtually every engagement. But North Vietnamese strategy emphasized sustaining operations rather than winning battles, making tactical mobility advantages irrelevant to strategic objectives. Americans could reach any location within hours, but couldn't translate mobility into political victory when opponent dispersed forces, avoided decisive engagement, and accepted casualties, sustaining resistance until American commitment eroded. Modern application: mobility advantages are valuable but insufficient for strategic success when opponents adapt strategies that don't require matching mobility, and when political conditions don't translate tactical success into strategic victory. Third truth: technological superiority requiring extensive support infrastructure creates vulnerabilities when that infrastructure demands resources potentially better allocated to other capabilities, and when infrastructure itself becomes target. Operating 12,000 helicopters required 30,000 maintenance personnel, continuous spare parts supply, vast fuel consumption, extensive base infrastructure. These requirements consumed resources that couldn't be used for other military capabilities or for political programs potentially more valuable for achieving strategic objectives. Additionally, helicopter-dependent operations were vulnerable when maintenance systems were disrupted, when weather prevented operations, or when enemy tactics specifically targeted helicopter vulnerabilities. Modern relevance, high-technology approaches requiring extensive support, create trade-offs between technological capability and resource efficiency. Sophisticated systems provide advantages, but at costs that may exceed benefits when simpler approaches achieve acceptable results, consuming fewer resources. Fourth truth: medical capabilities dramatically affecting survival rates create morale asymmetries, favoring forces with superior casualty care but don't necessarily translate to operational advantages when opponents accept higher casualties pursuing strategic objectives. American helicopter medevac created unprecedented survival rates with wounded reaching hospitals within golden hour. This improved morale, knowing that injuries wouldn't necessarily be fatal. North Vietnamese lacked comparable capabilities, creating higher death rates from equivalent injuries. However, this medical advantage didn't translate to operational success because North Vietnamese accepted casualty rates that would be devastating for American democracy, continuing operations despite losses that American medical advantages couldn't prevent. Modern application: superior medical capabilities are humanitarian imperative and morale advantage, but don't guarantee military success when opponents are willing to accept casualty rates that medical advantages merely reduce rather than prevent. Fifth truth: adaptation to new technologies by inferior forces reduces but never eliminates technological advantages when superior forces continuously develop capabilities, staying ahead of countermeasures, demonstrating that technological competition is dynamic process rather than static achievement. North Vietnamese developed anti-aircraft weapons, engagement tactics, operational adjustments reducing helicopters' effectiveness. But Americans responded with improved helicopters, better tactics, enhanced countermeasures, maintaining advantages, though reduced from initial period. This dynamic adaptation cycle meant helicopters remained valuable throughout war despite enemy countermeasures because American forces developed capabilities faster than enemy-developed complete counters. Modern relevance: maintaining technological superiority requires continuous development. Initial advantages erode through enemy adaptation, requiring sustained innovation, staying ahead of opponents' countermeasures, rather than assuming one-time technological investment provides permanent advantages. Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen's November 1965 observation of American helicopters deploying battalion within 30 minutes demonstrated revolutionary tactical capability that traditional ground-based operations couldn't match. His decision to avoid attacking landing zone, recognizing that helicopter mobility would enable devastating counterattack, represented adaptation to new reality where traditional infantry tactics were inadequate against opponent possessing instantaneous mobility and reinforcement. The 12,000 helicopters deployed to Vietnam, representing unprecedented concentration of rotary wing aircraft, demonstrated American commitment to technological solutions for tactical problems. Helicopter mobility provided undeniable tactical advantages, enabling rapid deployment, reinforcement, and medical evacuation. But these tactical advantages proved insufficient for strategic victory when opponent adapted operations, avoiding direct engagement, and when political conditions didn't translate military dominance into sustainable political settlement. By war's end, with 5,000 helicopters destroyed and 5,000 crew members killed, demonstrating both helicopters' extensive usage and their vulnerability, while North Vietnamese forces, having adapted operations, reducing but not eliminating American mobility advantages through dispersal, anti-aircraft weapons, and tactical adjustments. Mathematics proving that technological innovation provides tactical advantages without guaranteeing strategic success were written through 11 years of intensive helicopter operations that dominated battlefields without achieving political objectives that military power alone couldn't accomplish. The distinctive sound of Huey rotors, whop whop whop, becoming iconic symbol of Vietnam War, represented both technological achievement, revolutionizing infantry mobility, and ultimate limits of technology, achieving political objectives when opponents adapt tactics and sustain resistance despite tactical inferiority, making helicopter mobility valuable but insufficient for achieving strategic victory in conflict where political will rather than battlefield success ultimately determined outcome.